How do you help stakeholders and legislators understand key issues when advocating new policy? What does it take to navigate the complexities of government to shape funding and programming? Which skills are critical for success in policy and politics? Welcome to the School of Public Policy series, Profiling Professionals in Public Policy. Today, we invite you to join the conversation as we speak with Penn State alumnus John Richter about his political and policy experience. Hi, I'm Whitney Sheridan, Director of Communications for the School of Public Policy at Penn State, along with Catherine Baumgardner, our Director of Professional Development and Student Engagement. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Whitney. Looking forward to a great program today.
Me too. Our guest today is John Richter. He's the Federal Legislative Director at G2G Consulting, where he oversees the firm's federal clients and their legislative priorities. Richter served as campaign staff on President Obama's 2008 campaign, as well as Deputy Political Director for the Clinton-Kaine campaign and for the Biden-Harris campaign. He worked for more than 8 years for members of Congress in the House and Senate, working for Senator Bob Casey and Congresswoman Michelle Grisham. He also served as a lobbyist and advocacy and political specialist for the American Nurses Association and WorldatWork. Welcome, John. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So this is a discussion that's an opportunity for you to talk to John Richter about his career path and experience. We want to encourage your questions throughout the discussion. Please don't hesitate to use the Q&A or the chat window at any time throughout the talk. I'm going to keep reminding you throughout our discussion. So don't hesitate at any point to just ask us a question and ask those questions of John. I want to begin, John, by asking you about your inspiration for this interest in policy and politics. I know that you got, inspired early on. Is this something you knew you always wanted to be as a young child? Talk to us about those steps that you took that helped you gain that early experience that helped solidify this path.
Yeah, while my parents I wouldn't say were super political, we were very interested in current events. So what was happening in the world and what was happening in current elections were always something we talked about at a young age. There's a funny story that I remember, and I think this probably went back to the 92 election. And my dad asked me, I was very young at the time, who I wanted to win. And I said Ross Perot, because I had big ears just like him. And my dad was like, well, we don't pick presidents based on their looks. What issues do you care about? And I told him, and we had a discussion about what candidates were really supporting those issues that I cared about as a young kid. And that just really led to my interest. And then during the 2000 election, my dad got me really involved in the Al Gore campaign. I did some volunteering, went to some rallies, and just all through middle school, high school, I knew this was something that I really wanted to at least be involved in, but I really thought about it as a career.
So then in college, you continued this work, correct? And how did you get involved?
Yes. So one of the first things I did when I got on campus was join the College Democrats. It was during the 2004 election. So it was really active, going door to door, getting students out to vote, registering students to vote. There was definitely some political rallies on campus for both parties. So it was something that I was able to do from almost day one when I got to campus. I was a poli-sci and history major, so a lot of my classes were geared toward politics and current events and things like that. So I was able to work on that, and then I eventually got interested in international politics. I joined Model UN on campus, where we were able to debate international problems and things like that. And then I really worked to try to get an internship in the Senate while I was in college.
John, it strikes me in listening to you that you have such a direct path to getting to where you are today. And so many of our speakers talk about the crooked path of getting where they are in their careers. So how did you think about, who did you look to? Who helped you to craft that more direct journey to end up where you are today?
Yeah, it was, it really just happened like I said, we weren't involved in politics, but I didn't come from a very political family. But in high school, there was a program through our bar association that had high school kids that did not grow up in a law firm family or a family with lawyers, to really get employed with a law firm for the summer, and help out. And the law firm that I got assigned to just happened to be started by Senator Casey's dad. And a lot of the lawyers at the firm, or two of the lawyers that were still at the firm, were still friends with the family. So they knew I was really interested in politics, and I really wanted to work, intern in the Senate. So they were impressed by the work, my drive and my ambition throughout that summer, and recommended me for the internship. And once I got to Washington, there are some people that come to Washington thinking, especially as an intern, oh, I'm gonna see the member of Congress every day. Every day is gonna be about negotiating a bill or writing a floor speech, and it's really not like that. And some people get turned off, and they're like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and it's not really what I want to do. For me, it was exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was a lot of constituent services and talking to people about their priorities and what was really important to them back home in Pennsylvania. And it was just something that even as an intern, I loved being able to do. So it led to a career in Capitol Hill after that internship.
Talk to us a little bit more about, it's not exactly what you think, talking to those representatives day in and day out. What are we talking about? What is the day-to-day like?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of the day-to-day, no matter where you are as a staff member, whether you're a staff assistant, which is the person answering the phones and greeting people in the front office, all the way up to the member or the chief of staff, you are really a customer service individual. Your job is to represent not only the state or commonwealth where you work and represent, but also the member of Congress that you're working for. So it's always being polite. It's trying to have an understanding ear. I mean, you could be getting yelled at on the phone or being yelled at in a meeting by a constituent that's angry about a policy position. And you need to understand that your job is not to put your own personality or your own professional or personal beliefs involved. I don't think anyone can say they agree with a politician 100% of the time, even if it's somebody you really admire. But that's not your job. Your job is to listen to their concerns, try to express maybe the senator doesn't have a position on that particular topic, and just listen to them and say, listen, I'll bring this back to the senator, to the staff, and we'll see how we can work from there. Or there might be just the opposite opinion, and you have to be able to say, listen, the senator appreciates your concerns. This is why he feels that this is a bill to vote yes on or a bill to vote no on. I'll still talk to him about it, but that's how we have to do it. So it is not just writing a bill every day. That is, especially as you're moving up in your career, that is a large part of what you're doing, but it's not the only thing you're doing. You're not walking and talking like you do on the West Wing. A lot of the times, even as senior staffers, the way you're communicating with your boss is over text message or over a memo that you need to get to be done in one page, and the senator will say yes or no, and give it back to you. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to be talking to the senator every day. We're going to be having hour-long in-depth policy discussions on things. It's just not usually like that.
When you talk about customer service being so important, I can imagine a lot of students might discount some of the part-time work that they might have done in high school or during college as in some of those types of positions as something that they might want include on a resume or on a job application. Can you talk a little bit about how they might reference that experience and how that might be important in positions that you're interviewing candidates for or that you may have applied for in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I tell students this all the time, or people looking to get on the Hill or their first foray into either campaign work or politics work on the Hill. Like I said, it is customer service. You are talking to people. You're required to be polite to people. You can't lose your temper, and those are all things that you gain by working at a grocery store, by working at a department store, being a waiter or waitress. Those are things that are really important. So while you think, oh, well, how is me being a server at a restaurant directly connected to going to work on the Hill? Well, if you were a server at that restaurant for 5 years, it shows the person that's hiring you that, oh, this person stayed in a small family run restaurant for 5 years. They clearly know how to talk to customers. They were clearly successful at people skills. And that's really what you need, because like I said, no matter what position you are, whether it's on the Hill or even in campaigns, your job is to talk to people all of the time and put the best foot forward. And one of the things that someone told me very early on the Hill, when I was an intern, is you might be the only person that this constituent has interaction with directly related to the senator or the congresswoman. So they might go home and say, you know what, that person was really rude to me, which means Senator Casey's really rude in connection. Or they can go home, and say, you know what, I don't really agree with Bob Casey on everything, but his staff were so nice to me. They really expressed his opinion. They really listened to my opinion. And then go tell their friends, yeah, Bob Casey's staff is really nice, and he must be a good person if he hires these good people. So your attitude and your ability to connect with people reflect on your boss. And those are all skills you get in any sort of customer service job that you have throughout your life.
I want to push just a little bit more on your experience with Bob Casey's position, not necessarily the position, but the path that you might recommend that students follow to get internships with active legislators. That's often a question that I hear is, well, I don't know someone. How do I get a foot in the door? You clearly did through a law firm, and having the good fortune of having Bob Casey's father as your preceptor. But for the student that doesn't have that kind of foundation, how do you suggest that they navigate opening that door, or at least exploring some options?
Yeah. So I always tell people you oftentimes need to pick a party and stick with that party, unless you are working for a very moderate member on either side, or it's like a good family friend, or he's your neighbor and you agree with them on certain issues. But I would always try to pick a side and go with it. There are clearly sometimes you have to change in your life. That's always really important, because if I'm looking at a resume for a Democratic office that I work in, and all of your experience has been with Republicans, I'm going to ask you point blank, well, why did you work for them? Why didn't you work for the party that you're now applying for? But I would think even more importantly is don't just, especially for internships, don't just settle for your member of Congress or from your state or your senator. Really, really expand. There are some offices like in Pennsylvania. We are so close to Washington, D.C. is so close to Pennsylvania that we get a ton of applicants, because it's easy to get here. You might know family that live in the area that you could stay with. So it's often really easy, but there might be somebody from Arizona that is just, I was talking to somebody last night that worked for a member from Illinois even, and they had trouble finding interns because they weren't getting the applicants. So I would really spread your resume pretty far and wide. I would always have a connection to that office, or you don't just say, oh, I'm applying for this person just because I'm applying for every Democrat internship or every Republican internship, because you might get asked, well, why do you want to work for member so-and-so? And just know, like, oh, well, you know what? They're on the education committee. I'm really interested in public education. These are the bills that the member has introduced in the last year, which is why I really want to work for them. So I would always have a connection, but it doesn't need to be a location connection. Like, oh, I grew up in Arizona or I grew up in Pennsylvania. You can spread your resume a little bit far and wide. I would also, especially if you're living in the state, don't discount district offices or state offices. It's not the same policy experience, but you're going to get a very good internship in a state office or a district office. And oftentimes, if you do a really good job, those state offices will say, you know what, that person was great. You should hire them. on the team when there's a job opening, or you know what, you might be able to do another summer internship somewhere, and they can say, you know what, they were a great intern for us, you should take them on for the DC internship. So I wouldn't discount or pass up any of those state offices, because they are really they are valuable experiences. And I would even go further to say that sometimes, especially if you're like a summer intern and it's August, you're going to get a lot more access to the member than the folks in DC are, because that member is going to be traveling around this district. A lot of times they're going to bring interns along to those events with them. You might often get more access than you would in DC. So those are I think the 3 or 4 big things that I would do.
I want to remind our guests that we are open for questions, and we really encourage this opportunity for you to ask John Richter your questions via the Q&A or the chat at any point during today's discussion. John, one of the things I wanted to ask you, you've worked on a lot of high profile, high stress campaigns. I can imagine, especially for someone who's coming into any campaign that's high profile, new, there might not be a lot of opportunities for mentorship maybe, or training. What's your advice for students? You had said earlier that you kind of just do all of the jobs that are available on these campaigns. It's not just working with the legislator or the candidate. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, especially if you're just starting off, and this is both on campaigns and I would say even on the Hill, don't be pigeonholed, or don't think, oh, this job is not exactly what I want to see myself doing in 10 years, so I'm not going to apply for it. Right out of college, did I want to go? I moved to Colorado to work for the Obama campaign. I was a field organizer. My job was to recruit volunteers, keep volunteers coming back every week, and to go knock doors. Did I love walking around strange neighborhoods, knocking on strangers' doors? I didn't, but I was good at it. And my supervisors, I knew I was good at it. I wasn't making excuses. I was going out in the rain. I was going out in the heat. I was really working hard at it. So when I needed somebody as a reference, they were 100% willing to let me to do that. And yes, I got to transition into the political side of things for my next few campaigns, because I was really good at that aspect, and it was an easy transition skill. So if every job on the campaign is not going to be big and glamorous, and sometimes you might have to do the job that just no one wants to do, but I will tell you, even as deputy political director on these last 2 campaigns, the week of election week, there's nothing else for me to do. I was knocking doors, as the state director is now out knocking doors. You're doing whatever the campaign needs to win. And it doesn't matter where you are. So just do whatever you're asked of. That is, don't say, oh, this is beneath me, I'm not going to do that, I don't want to do that. Because that's not how you're going to get a really good reference. So they say, hey, we need 5 more people on the doors. I'll go on the doors. I don't have much to do right now. I can go do that. Or, I'll go and pick up pizza because I have a little lull right now. It's just anything that you're willing to do. It's like all hands on deck all the time. So that's a big thing that I would recommend.
We've talked a little bit about this, but we have a question here. How do we seek these internships and experiences?
Yeah, so the internships are usually on all of the websites for the members of Congress or senators. I would start looking very early to know exactly, because everyone has a different deadline, and usually because these are so competitive, the deadlines are pretty strict. So I would do your research, try to figure out when and where you can do these internships. And I would look on their websites to see how you can apply for those internships. And then for jobs on the campaign, I would look at the state parties. That's a lot of times the state party is who is hiring field organizers, political directors, finance assistants, and anything that they can. There's a long list of campaign jobs as well. And I would look at those as well. And if you're a student and you don't have the time to be a full-time intern or a full-time person on a campaign, there are definitely ways to do part-time internships during the school year, during the summer. Also, there are sort of internship opportunities on campaigns. And I worked, one part of my region in Pennsylvania was always State College. I made sure they put me in the State College region, and there's a time commitment, but it's not a huge time commitment. So you're able to get that campaign experience while still being a student. And then when you graduate, transitioning that into a higher level campaign job or a job on Capitol Hill or in other sort of politics.
And then what advice would you give to students as they're deciding what campaign or legislator to pursue, who they want to work with? Will an opportunity with a losing candidate impair future opportunities? Or maybe if they're advocating for a particular cause that's not in favor with a party that has won an election, do they potentially take that off their resume? These are things that they might consider as they're applying for positions later. What are your thoughts?
There's always
their passion.
Yeah, there's always the risk of losing your job. So when you work on Capitol, and this, I'll be completely honest here, when you work on Capitol Hill, you rise and fall with your member of Congress. So if you're working for a member that might be a little shady, and they might be a little shady, and they get caught up in a scandal and they resign tomorrow, you're out of a job tomorrow. And if it's a bad scandal, you might think twice about, okay, is this something I want to keep on my resume? You might put it on the resume or be frank with an employer and say, listen, I work for this person. I wasn't involved. This is what I want to do. But if looking at campaigns and looking at losing candidates, like no one can win every single time. Some people lose every single time. As long as you're doing something that you're passionate about, that is not, I would say, really harmful for a lot of things, I wouldn't be worried about that. Like if your candidate loses, and they were somebody who was good and decent and really advocating for things that you personally believed in and you thought were going to be good for the country or for your region, no one's going to look down and say, oh, well, you worked on 3 losing campaigns, you're not somebody we're going to hire. That's usually not what happens. And if you're working on the Hill and your boss loses re-election, no one's gonna look at that and say, okay, this is we're not going to hire this person. But okay. I mean, there's the other thing is when there are tidal waves of losing. So like let's look back at 2010 when a ton, like Democrats had control of everything. Democrats got wiped out in the midterms. There was there was not a lot of jobs for Democrats because Republicans took control. So that's often something that it's a risk, and you have to then figure out, okay, what is my next move? But it shouldn't, if this is something, a career you really want to work in, it shouldn't be something that deters you. It just should be something you have to consider could happen one day.
Gotcha. Reminder, we're taking questions, so don't hesitate. We've had one great question, but we're open for many more.
I have another one. I'm fascinated by your work in political campaigns. So I'm really curious about, what did you love about working on those campaigns? What drove you crazy? And what were some of the lessons that you took away that helped to form where you are today?
Yeah, I think I loved, and while it also drove me crazy, but I loved the fast-paced environment. Like you were doing 15 different things that all need to get done right now for this to be able to move forward. And my campaigns, especially when I was in as deputy political director in the last 2 campaigns, were very different because the Clinton campaign was in person and the Biden campaign was largely virtual. So there was things that even changed. I was on a lot, like when I was on the Clinton campaign, I had all of Eastern Pennsylvania. So from like Tioga County all the way over and down. And I was driving across those counties every day while also trying to do work on my computer and get lists done and all things like that. For the Clinton campaign or for the Biden campaign, I was just on Zooms all day, on phone calls all day, because I wasn't able to interact with folks that were in person. But, you know, there's a lot of people that want to volunteer. They come out of the woodwork and they say, hey, how can we help? How can we make this event really great? How can we get involved? Those are things that I really, really loved. I still talk to volunteers that I've met on the 08 campaign out in Colorado. I go visit them all of the time. They were my grandmas on the 08 campaign. And there's a gentleman that I still work with in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. He's an immigrant from Mexico. He actually is a janitor at Penn State Hazleton. But he was just really passionate about getting involved and getting the immigrant community in Hazleton involved. I got him to meet Joe Biden when he came to Wilkes-Barre to campaign for Secretary Clinton at the time. He actually got to do the Pledge of Allegiance at that event. He got to, and then because he stayed involved, because I stayed active with him, he got to introduce Kamala Harris when she came for this last time. So those are things that like you see and like, I can really help people. People are really involved. They want to do this work. And those are things that I really enjoy. And then there's just things that are really frustrating is when you're not able to, there's a lot of things that are, I don't want to say secret, but there's a lot of things you have to navigate around that you can't tell people why I'm asking you this question. And I don't like to fib. But when the campaign calls you and says, hey, the next president or possibly the next president of the United States is coming to town. We haven't released it yet because of security reasons. We can't tell anyone yet, but I need you to find a restaurant that is friendly to the campaign that they can maybe stop by. And there might be a town. I mean, I don't know every single restaurant that is a Biden supporter or a Hillary supporter in all of Pennsylvania. So it's hard to like, okay, hey, by the way, if a Democratic candidate or supporting of a Democratic candidate can come by, would you, and that's just for me, frustrating. I understand why I had to do it, but that's a pretty hard thing to be able to do. And the same thing with like finding a location for a big event. And I'm like, okay, how am I going to go and ask these people if I can have the vice president here without telling them the vice president might be coming. So yeah, it's a little challenging.
We have another question here. What resume advice do you have to help candidates stand out?
Yeah, so I like to use a lot of like active words, and I think a lot of people will show this in their resume. So like lead, manage, develop, plan, strategized. Implemented. Those are types of words that I would start off on your bullet. If you're young and this is your first real job, I would not have your resume more than a page. I've seen people that like their first year out of college have a 3-page resume. Don't do that. Like have it 1 page. I'm now 14 years in the job. I'm on 2 pages now, but that was as a very recent thing. So I would keep it to 1 page. I would really focus on those action words of what you were able to do at that particular job or in that particular organization. I think those are the biggest things that I would have. A political resume / policy resume is very different than a business resume. I don't think you need the like objective at the top. I know a lot of business. At Penn State, I took a business writing course instead of the liberal arts writing course. So when I had my first resume, the chief of staff at my office, like it was so much red on the paper because I was writing it as I'm trying to go work for a company rather than a politician, where a lot of the words are like managed, developed, communicated, organized, things like that are the words that I would really try to use.
Great. Well, we're taking your questions, and that was another great one. Thank you so much for that. So don't hesitate to add those questions to the chat or the Q&A window throughout the discussion. John, I want to talk about your current role as the Federal Legislative Director. We do have another question coming in, but let's get to this first. I do want to address this. Talk to us a little bit about your primary responsibilities and your typical day. What's your role?
Yeah, so my role it's sort of twofold. I manage a certain set of clients that have more Capitol Hill priorities, whether it be appropriations or writing bills, amendments, things like that. And then I manage our team that they might be managing other clients that only have partial roles or partial interest on Capitol Hill. But mainly what I do is I try to connect our clients with members of Congress that might represent them or their employees, or people that are really interested in the type of work that the client particularly does. So I have a rare cancer nonprofit that we recently developed a piece of legislation with 2 members of Congress to expand coverage for molecular diagnostic testing for cancer patients. That one, we didn't really work with their own members of Congress, but we found 2 members, bipartisan members, that were really that are champions for rare diseases and cancer issues that we were able to work with on this legislation. The same, and then what I would do now is expand my reach. I would talk to other members that are particularly interested in those topics. And it's sort of this is a sort of easier topic to find because there's so many cancer caucuses on Capitol Hill. So I researched who was a member of the House Cancer Caucus, the Deadliest Cancer Caucus, the Childhood Cancer Caucus. And then I'm able to then go to their staff, set up meetings, and try to convince them to co-sponsor our piece of legislation. I also figure out, okay, well, I have a STEM education nonprofit that really works on mobile STEM education for underserved communities. Well, right now there's not a lot of grant programs for that type of work. So working through the appropriations process, trying to write in some language that would get some federal funding to organizations like theirs. Now, it's not an earmark. It can go to any organization like theirs, but then working with members of Congress that are, again, really supportive of those issues or on the appropriations committee to get them to include that in the appropriations bill. So I'm able to still work on legislation and amendments and really work with Hill staffers all of the time. I would say 3 or 4 times a day, I'm on Zooms or phone calls with staffers. And when it's not the pandemic, I'm on Capitol Hill meeting with those staffers several times a week.
I want to ask you, we're going to ask you a couple different questions. I know Catherine has one first about a lot of the skills that you're talking about, but we do have a question I want to go to really quick. What do you recommend for students who are interested in work in embassies or with international affairs?
Yeah, so I would not say I'm the expert on this topic, but for the embassies at least, well, I think there's two folds here. If you're looking to work at U.S. embassies in other countries, the Foreign Service is the way you need to go on that realm. If you're looking to work with embassies in the United States, but maybe the British Embassy in Washington, D.C., they have job postings all over for organizations like that. A lot of times, if it's a country that doesn't you might need and I don't want to say an advanced degree, but you might have to have a degree that's focused on some of those issues that they're working on. So let's say there's a lot of trade issues that we work on with EU countries. Well, you might need to have a trade background or sort of a tax background, things like that. But those are always those jobs I see posted all of the time. But for embassies, U.S. embassies in other countries, the Foreign Service is really the biggest way to be able to do that. And then international affairs. It's really your past experience in college and the degree that you get, the research you're able to do. A lot of times, especially on Capitol Hill, there are folks that either start off on the lower level rung of foreign policy issues like legislative correspondence or things like that, or that are folks that worked at the State Department or worked in NGOs or things like that, like off the Hill. They'll then get brought on when those foreign policy jobs open up. But you don't need the foreign policy. You don't need the Foreign Service or anything like that for those jobs. I worked on foreign affairs, international affairs when I worked on the House side, but it was just among a lot of other issues that were just that were thrown to me, but it was the issues I minored in at Penn State. So there were ones that I really appreciated.
You have such great advice on how to navigate this very complex and sometimes often area that a lot of us don't really understand. So I appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, that one of the things that I didn't know in college that I just wasn't prepared for was the amount of organizations in Washington, D.C. that are directly connected to politics. So when I first came here, I was really, I didn't get a job right away. And I was really upset about it. I was like, how am I going to get a job on Capitol Hill? I don't understand how to do this. And then I started looking at job postings, and there are organizations for everything that you might be interested in. So you might have to go work at that organization for a little bit, get that certain policy experience, and then apply for jobs on the Hill. Or, you know what, you might have to go be a deputy scheduler, and you might not want to be a scheduler, but once you're on the Hill and you show that you're valuable and you show that you're a hard worker and you're willing to pitch in wherever necessary, it's easy to transition. So I didn't want to forget those two things.
Well, those navigational skills are obviously what your clients really value in you. And I can imagine that you have to be flexible. You have to have a lot of knowledge about a lot of different things. And there are probably times when you might find yourself where you're maybe navigating competing interests on different clients. How do you balance that? How do you manage that representation and that advice?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always honest with the folks that I'm meeting with. And that is as a lobbyist and as somebody that does this type of work, it is something that I appreciated when I was on the Hill. There were people that I met with that I knew were not being honest with me, or that weren't telling me the full story of an issue, right? And that when they would come back to me, I would throw out their fact sheet. I would throw out because I couldn't trust them. I couldn't bring that information to my boss. But there were lobbyists, or there were organizations that would come to me and say, listen, we want you to co-sponsor this bill. Here's why we think it's good. This is the information the other side is going to tell you why it's bad. This is why we don't think it's bad for your state or your district. Here's all the information. And I was able to trust them, and I'll then make an informed path forward for myself, and then being able to go to the congressman or the senator and say, hey, these are all the facts. This is my expert opinion, and that's how you're able to do it. So I've taken that experience, and that is what I do as a lobbyist or as a consultant. I'm able to go and say, listen, these are the facts. These are the pathways that we would love you to be able to do. However, we know this might be the most challenging. So if you can't do that, can you do this for us and try to move things along slowly? But to do this work, you need, no matter what it is, you need to be ready for a snail's pace to get things done. And you need to be ready to talk to your clients or your members of Congress that this might not get done in a week. This might not get done in 10 years, but this is something we can work on slowly to get it done.
A lot of what you're talking about is that communications aspect of it that you mentioned earlier, and the business writing class that you talked about. How did you, and having to adapt the way that you communicate with different parties and different people who have those competing interests? I can imagine having to figure out that elevator pitch quite often and having to adapt it depending on who you're talking to. Can you tell us a little bit about how you have to adapt that strategy, the importance of maybe the time management? Because you might not have a lot of time to spend with some of these folks.
Yeah. Most meetings, and this is something I have to explain to my clients all of the time because they're in business, they're used to 2-hour meetings. When you're meeting with a staff member, you get maybe 30 minutes, like at most. When you're meeting with a member, sometimes they're running to and from votes. You might get 10 minutes with that member. So not only you have to yourself prepare your client for that elevator pitch, but you also have to realize that even if you're giving them leave behinds or you're sending them documents, they don't have time to read a 5-page position paper on something. Like, unless they asked you for a 5-page position paper, you might just need to do something in 1 to 2 pages. And you have to take that summarizing skill that you and realize, okay, what is the most important thing here? And a lot of times it is state-specific facts or district-specific facts. It is really, these are the members that really like this. It's not wasting your time with people that you might know are never going to support this. Like, if you know that member is just really anti something, it's not worth your time or your client's time to go and try to persuade them because they might not ever get persuaded. You might want to say, hey, can you talk to another member and try to persuade that person? But you want to make sure that you can present your argument in a really succinct, I would say 20-minute elevator pitch when you're in these meetings. And all of the documents that you have supporting it should be 1 to 2 pages at most, because that's what Hill staffers have time to read. They don't have time to read much more than that.
Makes sense.
Wonderful advice. I'm thinking about the view that you have. You have this view of a landscape that is state-oriented, that is campaign-oriented, and now as a consultant and also a lobbyist, you've got a sense of kind of where the opportunities are. For our students and recent graduates, as they're thinking about maybe navigating that public space or looking for opportunities to enter that space, where do you see the greatest opportunities for growth? What kind of roles do you see evolving? And what role does the diversity, equity, and inclusion aspect play in all of that? Do you see more opportunities?
100%. I think organizations in Washington, D.C. are, and throughout the country, but politically minded organizations, policy minded organizations are really looking for diverse candidates that have diverse backgrounds, and not just diversity when it comes to what you normally think of diversity, but that they lived in different areas, that maybe are coming into this a few years into a career. They were a teacher and now they're really interested in education policy. So they're gonna be able to come in that. They're not oftentimes just looking for those, okay, this is my first job and I really love politics, I want to be able to get into it. It might be, you know what, I'm really interested in climate change, and I was an organizer on the ground trying to get my community to take climate change seriously. So those are types of people that they are really looking for. And they're just that you don't have to have just one career path to get here. There can be multiple career paths for you to jump into these types of jobs.
I have a great follow-up question to that from actually one of our attendees who wants to know how you can present yourself as a viable candidate when you might not have that much experience.
Yeah, so I would go back to, I would try to get as much experience as you can. And like I said, it does not have to be, I was an intern on Capitol Hill, I was an intern, or I was a staff member on this campaign. It could be anywhere from, I was involved in these organizations, and these are the leadership roles I had, or I took charge of this particular fundraiser or this particular aspect of it. Or, you know what, I'm involved with my church. I'm involved in the junior league, or I'm involved in an outside organization. And these are the experiences and the skills that I have gained. So you don't need to have that, oh, I was a campaign organizer, or I was this. You can bring in experiences and other things that you have in your real life and in your past experiences, and put that on your resume to show that you can organize things, you can effectively communicate, you can manage or develop strategies. And like I said, it does not have to be in politics. It can be in any aspect of your life. But I would say you do need some experiences. You need to be involved in a club or an organization or a church activity. You need to show that you're not just going to school and coming out and wanting a job, because in my mind, you really do need to show that you were involved in something and you're passionate about something, and you can really move an issue forward. And like I said, it can be any issue that you want, but you need to be able to show that on a resume.
Excellent advice. We have just a couple minutes left, but I wanted to ask, what do you wish you knew as a student, or early in your career maybe, and some last bits of advice that you could give to our current students or recent graduates?
So, and I hopefully none of my professors will see this, but honestly, it's being able to write in short, succinct pieces. As a history and political science major, they were always 15-page papers, 20-page papers, which I never had the luxury of writing in my real job. It was always very short and succinct. However, I took a legal brief writing course when I was at Penn State, and we were taught legal briefs needed to be short, succinct, because the judge did not have the time to read 15-page arguments. So it was a really valuable course that I was able to use even now. And that really helped me. And knowing how I can get information, knowing what information was important, knowing that there was advocacy groups out there that I can pull this information from. And then I'm not saying plagiarize, but you don't always need to reinvent the wheel every single time you do something. You can look at your past work. You can look at past things on what some things might have passed, and really reuse it and say, you know what, Congress voted on this bill 3 years ago. This is how we need to improve it. This is the language that was used. This is the language that we need to tweak to make it a better law. Those are all things that you're able to do that I just didn't realize that was really valuable. And then, like I said, there are so many organizations that are out there that I just didn't know about. And I didn't know that you could gain so much experience in so much ability to do. So any organization that you're passionate about, housing, environment, immigration, anything, there is an organization for you. You might be, I worked for the American Nurses Association. I am not a nurse. I am far from a healthcare background, but I was able to sit there and talk to nurses, learn about what was important to them and why they were struggling in their careers, or learning why a lot of nurses were burning out after 5 years of the profession, and then talking to Congress and learning how to effectively message that so members of Congress know why they need to care about it. Sometimes you have to spoon feed people of oh, well, why do I care about this? Oh, well, you care about this because your hospital can't find nurses to work. So you need to figure out how to care about that.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been an excellent conversation. Thanks to our guest, John Richter, the Federal Legislative Director for G2G Consulting. And thank you for all of your questions. We hope that you'll join us for our next discussion in the Policy Profile series on Wednesday, December 8th at 3 p.m. with guest Ann Gingerich. She's the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofits. I'm Whitney Sheridan with Catherine Baumgartner. For all of us with the School of Public Policy, thanks so much for watching. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.